Hi, hello, welcome to English Inside. Today's video is gonna be about relative clauses. So, let's get down to business. Relative clauses give us more information about someone or something. There are two types of relative clauses. Those which are called defining relative clauses, and they give us important or vital information about the sentence or the whole idea. And those which are called non-defining relative clauses, and the information that they give us is not important, not vital, and that's why it is considered extra information. A clause is a group of words containing a subject and a verb. It is usually only part of a sentence. It is to say, it's like a piece of the sentence within a sentence. Clauses can follow the next patterns. We can commence with a linker, then a clause, followed by another clause, connected by a comma. Of course, the final stop. We can also commence with a clause, then a linker, then the other clause, and the final stop. We can have one clause at the beginning, then another clause, including a linker, and that can be placed between commas, the rest of the sentence, and the final stop. Clauses are very important so as to understand complex sentences. Let's analyze the following cases. Simple sentences look like this. We stayed in a Hilton hotel. The Hilton Hotel was in the mountains. This is basically a collection of ideas. On the other hand, complex sentences will take all that information and will present it in a single sentence. For example, the Hilton Hotel, where we stayed in, was in the mountains. We have one subject, two verbs within a single sentence, connected by the word where. Other words that can be used to connect ideas or thoughts are the relative pronouns. And we have the relative pronouns who, whom, whose, which, that. The word who helps us to link people. The word whom helps us to connect people, especially when the person happens to be the object of the relative clause. The word whose helps us to establish relationship or to talk about people's possessions or belongings. The word which helps us to establish connection between things. The word that helps us to establish connections between people and things. Let's check the examples. That is the girl who lives next door. The word who makes reference to the girl. The boy whom he waved to is my cousin. The word whom makes reference to the boy. And we will usually encounter in these kind of sentences a preposition, in this case, to whom. That is the man whose son is my best friend. In this case, the word whose makes reference to the man's son. I saw a film which was directed by Lynch. The word which makes reference to a film. The car that you saw outside is mine. The word that makes reference to the car. it is not possible to write a comma followed by the word that. This pattern is not accepted in relative clauses when we are using the word that as a relative pronoun. There are other words that can help us to establish connections in a more precise way, and they are relative adverbs. When, where, why. The word when helps us to establish connections between time. The word where helps us to establish connections or links between places, and the word why helps us to connect reason. And the examples. 2020 was the year when I won the lottery. The word when connects a year. That is the school where she studied. The word where connects the school. That is the reason why I bought this car. The word why connects or introduces the reason. Let's pay attention to the following ideas. In both cases, we are talking about the same thing. That is the school. But in both cases, we use different relative pronoun or relative adverb due to the fact that we are using different context. For example, in the first one it says, that is the school which was closed last year. Whereas on the other hand, we say, that is the school where my children studied. The two ideas are linked differently due to the fact that in both cases we are using the school in different ways. For example, in the first idea, it is mentioned the school as a thing. And in the second idea, the school is mentioned as a place. And that is controlled by the context. Relative clauses are also called adjective clauses, since they help us to identify nouns. It is possible to locate the relative clause within a sentence by asking the questions which one, or which ones. For example, we can say, I love reading books. I love illustrations in books. Which type of books do you love reading? I love reading books that have illustrations. The word that helps us to establish the connection between the two ideas, and that is the relative clause. Relative clauses often begin with a relative pronoun, such as who, which, or that. The relative pronoun refers to a noun or pronoun outside the relative clause. The relative clause gives more information about that noun or pronoun. For example, this is the new book that I told you about. The relative pronoun that makes reference to the new book. It is as if the relative pronoun carries the meaning of the word that it is making reference to. Now let's talk about defining and non-defining relative clauses. In a defining relative clause, the relative clause contains important or vital information. For example, people who speak more than one language are called polyglots. The flat where he lives is very small. In both cases, the information contained within the relative clauses is important information and we cannot eliminate it. Let's see what happens if we do that. People are called polyglots. The flat is very small. It is not clear who are we talking to or what kind of flat is mentioned in the sentence. So that's why they are called defining relative clauses. In non-defining relative clauses, the relative clause contains extra information. For example, Philippines which has many beautiful islands, is a great place for holidays. Charles Darwin, who proposed the evolution theory, was a great scientist. In both cases, the relative clauses will be placed between commas, and that information can be omitted without altering the meaning of the sentence. For example, Philippines is a great place for holidays, and Charles Darwin was a great scientist. That's why this information is considered extra information. In a relative clause, it is possible to omit the relative pronoun or the relative adverb. When the relative pronoun happens to be the object of the relative clause, it can be omitted. When the relative pronoun happens to be the subject of the relative clause, it cannot be omitted. The relative pronoun whose and the relative adverb where are never omitted. For example, the book which I am reading is very interesting. This is the relative clause. This is the relative pronoun. This is the subject of the relative clause. This is the verb of the relative clause. I am reading. What am I reading? The book, and in this case the relative pronoun which makes reference to the book, which in this case happens to be the object. Therefore, the word which can be omitted, and we have the book I am reading is very interesting, and the relative pronoun can be implicit. Let's check this other case. People who don't eat meat are called vegetarians. This is the relative clause. The word who makes reference to people, therefore it is the subject of the relative clause, the verb, and the object. Therefore, in this case, the relative pronoun who cannot be omitted, and the sentence remains the same. Ta-da! Please like this video, share, comment, subscribe, and of course, thanks for watching. Bye!